coordinator here at UM-Flint. Okay, I guess we're recording. So I've been with UM-Flint about 10 months, and my main focus is recruiting, but I'm also the employee experience coordinator, so that involves a little bit more in terms of career development and the overall employee experience. So you might see my name around campus and whatnot, but I'm glad you joined us here today. I appreciate it. Everybody's really busy. We're going to keep this to an hour, all right? We all got a lot of things going on, and there's a lot of information to cover. So hopefully everybody can see my main screen. Is that true? Which says University of Michigan Flint, the slide. Okay, very good. And once again, if you have any questions, just use the chat box, and then Jackie will help me through that. But today what we're going to talk about is interviewing and really finding the right candidate for the job. And I know, we've already talked with a few of you here, how critical and how important it is to find the right person and to find the right job, especially in today's work environment. I've been in the recruiting world about 30 years, and I remember when I first started, I was a manager, then a district manager, and boy, did I make a lot of mistakes. And afterwards, I would hire somebody, and a month or so later, I would say, why did I hire that person? So I really got involved in the behavioral interviewing techniques, which are really relatively new. They've been out there, but not that long. And so, especially in today's job market, it's very tight. In other words, in some cases, there's more jobs than people. I mean, when COVID hit, a lot of the baby boomers decided to leave the workforce. And because of that, it really tightened up the job market. So for you guys that recruit, you're probably not noticing as many applicants as we used to see. And so that makes it a real challenge these days. So, and it's always, especially in today's work environment, it's really important to understand that the recruiting process goes two ways. Not only are we recruiting them, but they're taking a good hard look at us. So it's real important that we sell ourselves and that, it's competitive out there. And so we're going to talk a lot about, hiring in a certain process we call behavioral interviewing hiring. So let's reflect back. Think about people in your career that you've worked with. And I certainly can think of a lot of them that were not a good fit for their job. In other words, wow, caused issues, didn't show up on time, had conflicts with other people. And then have you ever thought to yourself, how did this person ever get hired? So we've all been there. I'm guilty of it. It's like, okay, I interviewed this person. How did I miss that? So we as employers have to keep thinking of innovative ways to select our candidates that are best suited for our jobs. So the traditional ways of hiring people really don't work anymore. And that's why we want to take a look at something called behavioral interviewing. So let's go to the next slide. That's what we're going to be about today. So what is behavioral interviewing? It's really the objective and measurable way to find the right candidate without falling into what I guess I would call the unconscious interview bias traps. These are traps that we all fall into. I remember when I was first a manager and I was evaluating candidates, I would fall on these traps. Here's an example. You have a face-to-face interview with somebody. They give you a nice firm handshake. They give you a lot of eye contact. They're well dressed. And you think, wow, pretty professional. This person's really sharp. And then what you do is you create that first impression bias and you carry it through the interview. We've all done it. And once again, good eye contact, firm handshake, well dressed. These are good things to have for a candidate. But it's not, these first impressions doesn't mean that they're suited to do the job that you're looking for. So, and I guess I call that gut feeling sometimes. Have you ever had just a gut feeling about a candidate? Say, wow, I think this is the right person, without really knowing all the facts about what they've done in the past. So that's really, interviewing is a skill. It takes a lot of practice and it needs to be developed. And we want to get away from these biases that, and we think, well, why do we do that? Why do we create a first impression? And why do we kind of go with that? Well, it's really human nature to try to make sense of our world and to simplify our world. And one of the ways to do that is to, sometimes we create these first impressions. So we want to take that out of the picture and focus on objective and measurable ways to take a look at people's past experiences and competencies that are required to be successful in this job. We want to take away those biases. So I looked at a survey that was done through LinkedIn, which is a pretty popular job board out there. And in this survey, approximately 90% of respondents indicated that behavioral interviewing methods were very, very effective in finding the right person. Because we learn more about the person when we use behavioral interviewing. So we're going to go into all that, because the bottom line is you want to get to know the real person in an interview, right? You don't want to hear memorized answers. You don't want to hear something that was scripted from an employee. So we're going to put them in situations where they can give you real life answers about the experiences that they've had. So let's take a look at our objectives. We'll do a quick overview of what our objectives are. First, we want to understand the importance of hiring. It's really, and surveys have shown this, and research has shown this, that it's the most important job of a manager. It affects everything you do. Hiring the right person can make or break a department. As the old saying goes, one bad apple can spoil the whole bunch. It's really important skill set for managers to have. Then secondly, we're going to define what is behavioral interviewing, what it is, and how we're going to do it. Third, we're going to look at the benefits. Why is it helpful? Well, it's going to help us find the right person for the job. It's going to be more objective, which means measurable, versus subjective, which is subject to bias that we talked about earlier. And fourth, we're going to identify the steps to prepare and conduct these interviews. What's the process? In other words, we're going to take a look at our jobs and say, what skills or behaviors do we want to measure? And then we're going to develop questions that measure these behaviors. And then we're going to use real life past experience questions to really get at those. And then fourth, we're actually going to practice writing some of the questions themselves. Okay. So let's go to the next one. So once again, we're going to talk about the importance of hiring. First of all, what are the consequences of a bad hire? I think we all know these. We've all gone through it. I was 8 years as a manager and a district manager, and I know we lose a lot of salary. Sometimes some research I've seen shows that it costs up to 2.5% of an annual salary of a person to replace them. That's pretty darn expensive. Not only that, but training costs, extra staff. Extra staff becomes less productive because they're busy training the new people. You lose productivity, you lose morale sometimes. Sometimes you don't know the new person. It takes a while to get to know new people because everybody brings their own personality and work ethic to the workplace. So usually when they're not a good fit, it usually means there's some soft skill issues. And that's what we talked about earlier, is measuring soft skills too. The cost of recruitment, there's another one. Time, advertisements, man, just to post an ad on a job board can be up to a couple grand sometimes. So, I mean, that's very costly. Can you guys think of any other issues that a bad hire can cause? Any thoughts on that besides what we talked about? You lose salary. There's morale issues, sometimes productivity if you hire the wrong person, training costs, any other issues that a bad hire can cause. How about costly mistakes too? There's another one. Saying employees making costly mistakes, management frustration. I hate to use the word burnout, but I mean, you're burning out people too, because the good people are taking out a lot more because they have to help out the new person so often. So let's take a look on the next slide of some key responsibilities of a manager. I know we've already talked about how important hiring is. It's really the number one responsibility. several reasons. You know, we talked about the time factor, customer service. I think when we talk about customer service, every interaction in our department, whether or not we're actually working with the public, is customer service, right? So in that case, we're really, it's a perfect example of how we use soft skills. So we're going to talk about soft skills in a minute. But so number one, I just thought hiring the right people for the team according to the skill and behavior needs, both hard and soft skills, is really one of the key responsibilities of a manager. Obviously, you're also leading and motivating a team. And that can only happen if you got the right person on the team. That's such a big part of it. Because when you look at all these other from 2 to 7, if you relate them to hiring the right people, planning organized workflows, you can only do that if you got the right person. Monitoring progress and ensuring goals are being met. The only way to do that is if people are reaching their goals and if they're coachable. That's really important. That's part of getting the right person on board. Once again, developing and coaching team members, they have to accept the coaching and be willing to accept the coaching. So that's all part of hiring the right person and making sure that the team's employee experience remains high. What does that mean, employee experience? Are they happy? Are they engaged? Are they challenged? Are they contributing to the overall department? Mostly, if you get good people, they want to be part of something bigger. They want to be challenged. They want to be engaged. And that only helps you as a manager to get to be more productive and to get the department where you want it to be. So let's go to the next slide and break it down into actual skill sets. So what are we looking for in a new employee? How do we measure? We're looking at both hard skills and soft skills. So what do we mean by that? Hard skills is really job-related knowledge. And I know Heather, we've talked a lot and I've worked with Heather quite a bit. And we talk about hard and soft skills, and that's really the job-related knowledge. In other words, an example is Microsoft skills, or they have to have a certain credential or certain skill set. Those are hard skills that people learn, okay? The soft skills are the personal characteristics and abilities essential for the job. Somebody talked about taking the initiative. Those are personality skills. That's something you're born with, whether it's teamwork, initiative, character, all those things are really important. So it's really a combination of hard and soft skills that you want to be able to recruit for. And I'm going to give you an example now. I'm going to pull this down and pull up. Hopefully we're going to be able to see this. Can everybody see that, hard skills versus soft skills? This is where it all begins. So when you're looking to hire somebody, you're going to say, okay, what are the hard skills and what are the soft skills that are necessary in this job to be successful? And then we're going to build off of these hard and soft skills. So once again, hard skills are really hands-on experience. And this just gives you examples. Can everybody read that? Can everybody see that? Hopefully.
Yeah, we can see it, Tom.
Okay. So if you look at hard skills examples, like if you know Adobe Creative Suite or healthcare related certifications or website development, those are hard skills that you learn. On the other side of the soft skills, are they able to communicate? Do they think critically? Are they able to adapt? We talked about adaptability earlier. Are they creative? Are they problem solvers? What you're going to do is identify for the job that you're trying to fill, what are the hard skills and what are the soft skills? You're going to build that into the job posting. And then you're going to measure for that when you do the recruitment process. And so this is really the beginning part. I mean, do you need somebody who's going to be a good decision maker? Do you need somebody who's really good at managing their time? A lot of these are pretty key elements of any job, really, in terms of soft skills, but there are so many of them. Do you have somebody that takes the initiative? Do you need somebody who is self-directed? Those are all things you want to think about. And soft skills are, once again, behavior type skills. So that's kind of a really quick overview of what hard skills and soft skills are all about. So that's the starting point, is the hard skills and the soft skills. Next, we want to talk about what is behavioral interviewing itself. If there's nothing else that you pick out of today, I want you to remember two things. One, it's really simply based on the premise that past behavior predicts future behavior. People don't change that much. What you get in the past is usually what you're going to get in the future. That's the basis of behavioral interviewing in a nutshell. That's a really key component of what we're talking about today. Secondly, we want to ask interview questions based on how the person reacted in certain situations in the past that will be similar to situations they're going to face in this new job. So, for example, a lot of people ask the question, tell me about yourself. Well, that's a good question, but you know what? They're probably going to practice that one and they're going to memorize it, and it's probably going to be scripted in a lot of cases, not in all the cases. That doesn't mean you never ask that question, but a better situation would be have them describe a situation they were in based on hard skills and the soft skills that you developed. Tell them what they've done in the past to see if they would be able to do that in the future with you. Those are the key premises. Once again, past behavior predicts future behavior, and we want to ask interview questions based on how they reacted in particular situations. So we're going to build questions like that. And basically what we want them to tell you is a story. Tell us a story about when this happened. So we're going to talk about how to develop those questions. And for once, like it says, they're open-ended questions. Sometimes the questions can start off with, tell me about a time, or describe a situation when, or give me an example of. It's a lot harder to fake those questions because you want to get into detail. There's going to be a lot of follow-up questions. You know, like, tell me about a time when you had a difference of opinion when with your supervisor. Tell me what the situation was. What was your role? What part did you play? How did you address it? How was it resolved? How do you feel about how it was resolved? Would you have done anything different? These are a lot of questions that get at the core of the soft skills that we're trying to measure. Because lots of times when we're frustrated with employees, we think, wow, I didn't know they were going to act that way in that situation. Why didn't I see that in the interview? Well, this helps you to ask the questions. Make them give you specific situations in their past that they've dealt with that directly correlate to what you need in your job. So that's kind of a good way to start off questions, is the tell me about or describe a time or give me an example of. Okay. So part of developing those questions is what I call the STAR method: situation, task, action, result. This is going to help you to actually develop the interview questions. Okay, so you start with the situation. Tell me about a time when, or explain a situation when you did a certain thing. Have them actually set the stage for you and develop that picture of what actually happened. The second one is the task. In other words, how were they involved? What task did they play? What role did they play? Have them explain the situation overall, and then secondly, what was the task that they specifically were involved in? And then what action did they take? How were they involved in the actionable part of that situation? And then what was the result? How did it end up? That's going to tell you a lot about their thought processes, about how they've dealt with similar situations that they're going to face in your job. And it's invaluable. And then remember, you can ask follow-up questions. Say that they answered a certain way and you wanted to follow up on that. Well, give me a little more information about how you were involved, or how did that conversation go? Or it's a lot harder for an applicant to fake these, because you're talking about specific situations. You can even ask them, well, what, in that situation, what job was that? What are you referring to? What position were you in? have them walk through that situation. So when you're developing questions, we like to use that STAR method. And I can help you guys with all that, but that is so valuable in terms of helping them to develop that, have them tell you that story. And once again, sometimes the follow-up questions are just important as the questions themselves. So, so let's take a look at a specific question, okay? We're going to talk about how is the STAR method specifically developed in these behavioral interview questions. So here's an example of a question. Describe a specific situation in which you disagreed with your supervisor about a particular job function. So that's the situation you're presenting to the applicant. Okay. Then they walk through that situation. Then you say, what part did you play in this situation? What was their role? That's the task part. How were they involved? And then third, what were the specifics of the disagreement? In other words, what was the subject matter? What did you guys talk about? That's really the action that took place. And then fourth, explain your involvement in this disagreement and what was the outcome? What was the result? That's the STAR part. What was the result? And what did you learn from this experience? That can be a result too. I think sometimes we underestimate asking questions like that because humility is really important sometimes. I mean, you really, if somebody makes a mistake, they own up to it and say, I'm going to learn from that. I'm going to move forward. So sometimes you want to ask, what did you learn about yourself as a result of this situation? Would you have done anything different in this situation as a result of what happened? You learn so much about the people that way. You're really getting into the soft skills piece. Okay. So what will the applicant answer to these behavioral questions? Tells a lot about the applicant for sure. This will tell us specifically how they've handled or reacted to situations in the past that are likely to come up in the job for which they are applying for. Once again, remember those two things. Past behavior predicts future behavior. And we want to put them in situations where they tell a story. Secondly, this is based on the premise, like I said, that the past behavior is best predictor of future behavior. It's harder for people to make up answers on the spot when you ask them for specific situations. So it's harder for them to fake it. And this will tell you a lot about the overall personality, the character of the applicant, and how they may react to certain situations based on your job function. So let's look at some examples of some. I'm going to pull a few. I'm going to send you guys, this is my interview question library, and it's based on behavioral-based questions based on soft skills. Now, I've got one for hard skills also, but let's take a look at one for soft skills. It's really important that say you're hiring a manager and coaching is really important. You want this person to be able to coach their employees and help them grow. So there's a whole section on questions about coaching. So let's look at one of them. Number one, most leaders have had an experience in which they coached a direct report who failed to improve. Tell me about a time when you worked with an employee who was not improving. And then the follow-up question, what might have caused the lack of improvement? What might you have done differently in your coaching strategy? What was the end result? There's the STAR method right there. Situation, task, action, result. You're going to learn a lot about these people and how they developed their people, how they coach their people, if you're looking for that type of a skill set. Number two, tell us about two different individuals who you have coached to accomplish the same task. What similarities and differences were there in your approach? How did it turn out? Tell me about that situation. How were they different? How were they similar? You're going to learn a lot about their thought processes. And you can go through, there's a ton of different soft skill, adaptability, flexibility. We do that a lot here at the University of Michigan-Flint. Describe a time when you had to complete a project with very little direction. What were some of the issues you faced? How did you go about completing the project? What was the end result? Would you have done anything different? I mean, there's a lot of follow-up questions. What did you learn about yourself as a result of this project? Would you have done anything differently? Once again, just some ideas to help them to tell a story about what they've done in the past. And once again, the analytics, once again, you want to determine which of these are most important in your job. If teamwork is critical, if they're working with a lot of different people in their job on a daily basis. Number one, describe a specific time when you were a part of a team in which differences of opinions developed regarding how work was assigned or completed. What was your role? What actions did you take? And what was the outcome? And once again, you can follow up. Would you have done anything different? And what did you learn about yourself? Once again, that's about the collaboration and teamwork if they're working with a lot of different team members. Communication is obviously critical in just about any position. Tell me about a time when you experienced difficulty communicating your thoughts clearly to another person or group. What message were you trying to convey? Where did the difficulty in communication lie? How did you end up getting your point across? What was the result? Would you have done anything different in that situation? What are you proud of? Those are types of things that these examples give. So these are really the soft skill pieces, and I will send you the whole library. Everything from, as you can see, communication, conflict management, developing others, interpersonal skills, leadership, problem solving, and it goes on and on. So let's take a look at hard skills, because there's also going to be some behavioral questions for hard skills. I don't have very many here because it's going to depend on the skill that you're looking at. But like number 2, tell me about the proudest success you had at a certain skill and why. What, if anything, did you change due to that experience? Or tell me about a time when you struggled. I don't know if I want to use the word fail, but you struggled at a certain skill set. What happened? What did you do about it? If anything, did you change due to that experience? So, maybe it's Microsoft Office skills, Google, whatever it might be, a certain skill set that's required in the job that you're looking for. Here are some questions that may help in terms of behavioral interviewing. Tell me about an experience doing a certain skill that really stands out. Why does it stand out? What impact did it have on you and your approach to it? And how did it affect the team? All that stuff is critical. And you can see that even developing hard skill questions, you can mesh in a lot of soft skill questions in with it. How did it affect the team? How did you communicate this? That type of thing. So once again, I'll send you all these, but these are just examples of interview questions, and it takes practice. It really does. So let's take a look at a couple situations where we can practice a little bit with some scenarios. And it says here, develop 3 behavioral interview questions based on the following topics. So let's look at these 3 topics. We're looking at conflict with a coworker, a stressful work situation, and then more of a leadership type question, handling an employee performance issue. So let's take a look at it. What we want to do in these 3 topics is we want to develop a question using the STAR method. And once again, good way to start some of these questions, give me an example of a time when this happened. Tell me about a situation, walk me through an example. So if we look at the first topic, conflict with a coworker, Let's see how we might develop a question for that. So how about something like, tell me about a time when you had to resolve a difference of opinion with a coworker or a customer or a supervisor. What was the situation? How were you involved? That's the task. How did you react? That's the action. What was the final outcome? That's the result. Would you have done anything different? So there you're developing the STAR method. S, situation. What's the task that you specifically were involved in? What's the action you took? What was the result of that action? And then part of the result would be, would you have done anything different if you would have had to do it again? And what did you learn about yourself? Once again, you don't have to ask all these questions, but it really helps if you can develop through that STAR method, the situation, the task, the action, result. That completes the full story. The situation, the task is really setting the stage for what actually happened. Okay, so let's look at the second example, stressful workplace. Maybe a question might be, what's the most stressful situation you faced at work so far? That's the situation. Explain the situation. How were you involved? That's the task. What did you do? That's the action. What was the outcome? That's the result. Would you have done anything different? Maybe they're going to tell you, well, I was really having conflict with my coworker and it was challenged and I didn't know how to face the situation. So I went to my supervisor and talked to my supervisor about it, and they walked me through this and this. That's going to tell you a lot about the person. It's also going to tell you a lot about the person if they answer it differently. They may say, well, I decided to go to the person myself and confront them. And I told them I didn't like how they were handling certain situations. Those are two completely different answers that are going to tell you a lot about the character of the person, about their soft skills, about how they handle stress. And once again, if they tell you about, walk you through particular situations that they've dealt with in the past, you can't make that up. Walk them through it, have them walk you through that situation. It's going to tell you a lot depending on how they answer it. And that's going to help you to better develop the type of person that you're looking for in that position, or to choose the type of person you're looking for. And the third one, leadership. Maybe a question like, tell us about a time when you needed to create and carry out a developmental plan with one or more of your direct reports who was not performing up to expectations. Describe that situation. Okay, there you go. There's the situation and there's the task. How did you approach it? That's the action. How did the employee react? That's the result. What was your reaction to their comments? How did it end up? Would you have done anything differently when you approach that employee? It's going to tell you a lot about this person's leadership capabilities, because you're putting them in a past behavior, in something that they've done, in a situation. You're making them tell you a story about exactly what they've done. So that's really what behavioral interviewing is all about. So let's compare this. We've all seen these typical interview questions. Why don't you tell me about yourself? And once again, it doesn't hurt to mix some of these in there, but I think you really want to rely on the situational and the behavioral types of questions when you're really trying to key in on what skills and what qualities do I really need in this person, and then make them tell you a story in their past about how they've done that. Okay, what are your strengths and weaknesses? Well, people probably practice answers to those before the interviews. Those are sometimes scripted answers. You want to get to know the real person. And once again, these aren't always bad to ask, but you don't want to rely on these, because once again, you don't get to know the real person. And I've always loved seeing this one. What do you want in this job? What one word describes you best? You know, sometimes those feel like trick questions. They don't really get at how is this person going to react in situations that I have in my job that I'm trying to fill based on their past work experiences or personal experiences. They don't always have to be work experiences. They can be personal experiences. And I think, Heather, you can let me know, but I think when I sent you, Heather, some questions on the work study, I think I mentioned either personal or work related, because sometimes in some cases, some of these folks don't have the work history. But if there's a personal situation, a conflict with a friend, how did you handle that? It doesn't always have to be work related. It helps if it's in the work setting that they're describing that situation in their past. But once again, sometimes there's a limited work history on the application if it's an entry-level position, for example. And so you still want to get to those behavioral interviewing questions and to be able to take a look at how they answer them based on the competencies. So once again, I know it's a lot of repetition, but behavioral interviews put employees in specific situations as they would face in the job that you're trying to fill. By seeing how they then react in the past, you will understand how they will react in the future. And this will help you find a better candidate overall versus asking a lot of general questions. That's the basis of behavioral interviewing. So, any questions? Does anybody have any questions that they would like to ask at this point? Because we're going to show a video in a moment here, which really is an example of a behavioral interview situation. Anybody have any questions? None? Nope. All clear? Does this help? Hopefully this all helps. So let's look at a video, and I hope this works. And I hope you guys can hear this video. So can you guys hear that?
Right now we can't, Tom. How's the volume? Is it up?
Interview questions.
Oh, geez,
What
same
employers are doing
situation.
is
Oh,
they're
I
looking
think if you
at-
turn it up, I think we can
Yeah.
kind of hear it.
I can
let's
hear
say they
now.
ask, can you give me an example of a time where you
That's
took initiative
better.
to solve a problem?
Is that
They want
better?
to hear a story about
Yeah,
it.
so start over.
Can you guys, is that better?
Can't hear him, but when this gentleman talks, we can hear him.
What employers are doing is they're looking at past behavior to get a predictor of future behavior. Let's say they ask, can you give me an example of a time where you took initiative to solve?
Is that good?
Yes.
Okay.
We can
problem?
hear him
I want
fine.
to hear a story about where you took initiative. And you need to organize that using the STAR technique, where you can talk about situation, task, action, and result. What I see a lot of students tend to do is they'll tell us a great story and forget the results. That's like watching a great movie and not seeing the ending of it.
Well, the STAR technique helps organize their thoughts. Behavioral interviewing is telling a story. You're telling us a story, you're setting up the situation so we understand exactly what you're doing. You know, you set the frame, you set the picture for us in our minds. The task is, what was the problem? What was the issue? Set that piece up. And I want to know what you did, not my manager did this or we did this. I want to hear a lot of what did you specifically do? And the results, how did it end? It's like telling a joke and not giving the punchline if you don't add the results in there.
When they get those behavioral questions, take it back to a specific example, explain what they did, set it up, give the details, and include a lot of names, dates, times, numbers, and places. The more details you can give, it really helps the employer understand the depth and breadth of what you accomplished. Oftentimes, if a student is giving examples that say, we did this and we did that when they're talking about a committee, I will stop them and say, that's great that your committee did that, but what specifically did you do? And what I find oftentimes that they didn't do anything.
Really want to kind of go through your resume, go through even go through the last couple of months of emails that you've had from student organizations, from your work, from different classes,
and really get into the detailed, 1 or 2 or 3 detailed stories that you can tell, that you can actually know exactly what happened, exactly what the concept was, who was in the meeting, what the real problems were, what the detailed actions were, and not only what you did, but some of the options that you considered, or the group considered before making the final decision, and then details in terms of what the result was.
Well, David, can you tell me about a time where you set a goal and you thought you did everything possible to achieve that goal, but still fell short?
Sure. Actually, I had a similar experience to that during my internship during the summer of 2010 with UBS Investment Bank. I was working in their global healthcare group, and really one of the first type of tasks that we had was working with one of our major clients on a merger model. So we were doing a pitch for them and coming up with a hypothetical merger situation. And my task was to create the merger model and come up with the analysis so that we could show them our numbers so that it made sense. So one of my senior associates came to me and said, David, this is your task. Go ahead with it. We're not going to help you out. Do your very best, and we'll come to you at the end of the day. So I literally spent the next, I would say, 12 hours of that day working at a computer on my merger model, which I thought, man, I've spent 12 hours. It's gonna be perfect. There's nothing wrong with this. And when I finally presented my model saying, got accretion here, we're going to make money off of this deal, the client's going to love it. The very first thing they did once I printed it out was take a red pen and cross an X all the way through it. And they said, you did absolutely everything wrong that we were looking for. And although you spent 12 hours, we're now going to have to go and redo this. So me, this is my first week as an intern, sitting there thinking, wow, I spent way more time than any full-time person would actually spend on this. And I did it all wrong. How is this possible? I'm not going to get a job at all. And now all my dreams of doing investment banking are ruined from this one engagement. And what I later realized was the fact that, when you come in, and this is what they told me at the end of the summer once I finally received a full-time offer, when you come in, they understand you don't know everything. You're not supposed to know every single thing about investment banking or your internship in general. When you come in, they want to see that you are putting forth the full effort, you're going above and beyond, and really trying to do your best in terms of what they show you and what they want you to do. So at the end, that same senior analyst who crossed an X directly through, which I will admit it was incorrect. My work. He later said, David spent half of a day on this model. He didn't give up. He was determined. He was confident in his work and what he thought was right. Even though it ended up being wrong, that same determination was what helped him to really be a perfect candidate for what we're looking for as a full-time analyst. So although I failed, and I definitely did fail, I did my best and I learned from that experience and ultimately got a return offer from UBS.
First, the candidate provides information about his project for UBS and the amount of time and work he put into the project, which helps the interviewer gain a real understanding of his efforts and the value of the task. Next, the candidate structured his example using the STAR technique: situation, task, action, results. Situation: explaining his UBS summer internship with the global healthcare group. Task: explaining the merger model he was developing for a client to share UBS's financial expectations for the merger. Action: the amount of time and effort he put into the project. Results: the lessons learned from his mistakes and how he overcame these failures to receive an offer for full-time employment. Third, the interview candidate's story was focused on a specific project and experience rather than a story about how he generally overcomes failure. Finally, the candidate's story was specifically about his experience and not a shared story about a team's accomplishments.
I wasn't
I
supposed
just got a psychic reading done and I'm literally shaking. The reading I got was done through California Psychics. For those of you who don't know, California
Oops,
Psychics is a
hang on.
website that you
I think
go
you
on.
gotta stop the video, Tom.
Psychic
Yeah.
you could ever want and need and see reviews for all.
There we go.
There you go.
I want to apologize for that last screen. I was supposed to cut it off before it hit that last screen. Did you notice that last screen? It said Ohio State University. Oh, well. Anyway, it looks like we had a few chats, Jackie. Do we have a few questions there?
I think it was just me saying I was stepping away and then I'm back, and then Heather said, this was a little while ago before the video, that the information you were sharing was very helpful. So
Gotcha.
that's the comments we've received so far.
Okay, so let's look at the video real quick, and we got only a couple minutes anyway, but obviously this was from a student perspective or an applicant, but this person had been a student, so take that into consideration. I think one of the key points too is he's telling a story, right? He's telling the story and he's using the STAR method. What's the situation? What was the task he was involved in? And what was the action that he took? Well, he worked pretty darn hard, 12 hours on it. And what was the result? Well, he messed up. You know, he didn't really get accomplished what he wanted to accomplish. But once again, the employer was measuring soft skills right in that situation. And the soft skill I saw was, first of all, persistence. I mean, this person was willing to work hard, and a lot of our jobs, you know, it's good to have the experience, but sometimes we can teach people that have persistence and really want to learn and have the desire and take the initiative. And that's how we can measure it through these interview questions. He may not have had all the specific tools to finish that project correctly, but he had the persistence, he was willing to learn. Plus, he had the humility in the interview to actually indicate, boy, I learned a lot. And they still, even though I messed up pretty bad, they still gave me a job offer because they saw how important those soft skills were and how hard he tried and how much he learned by going through that process. So, and once again, I think the video brought it out a lot more than I have, but remember, it's the you versus the we experience. When individuals indicate, well, this is what we did, or this is what, you know, we as a group did. Once again, you can jump in and say, I'd like to know specifically how you were involved in the situation. What was your role, which is the task part? What action did you take? And how did that create the result that happened? So I think those are probably some of the key things taken out of the video, you know. And once again, to kind of wrap up, we're just about to the end here. I'm going to send you guys all these resources. I'll send you the PowerPoint. Feel free to use me, call me, let's talk through. I can help you develop some of these interview questions. And not only that, but I can develop an interview matrix. In other words, like a spreadsheet where you can list what are the hard skills and what are the soft skills I'm trying to measure. We can develop questions around those skills, and then we can evaluate them on a spreadsheet by assigning scores to them. And I can help you through all that. I developed a matrix. And with some soft skills are going to be more important than others. So what we can then do is weigh them according to their level of importance. And I'm just, since we got a few minutes, I'm going to show you an example of that. Let me open up my next. So once you get through the interview process, and this is, I can help you develop this. So for instance, here's a matrix where you'll list some, and this is just an example of one. So listing the hard skills here on the left. And in this case, it was technical skills, admin support experience, and maybe the hard skill was Microsoft Office. So you have determined in this job that these are very important hard skills. Then you've got the list of soft skills. They've got to have an attention to detail. They have to be very time management oriented. They have to be able to follow up real well. They need strong communication skills. They have to be able to work on conflict management, problem solving, adaptability. Once again, this is probably a bigger list than we need, but we've determined, or you guys have determined, that these are the skills, hard and soft, that are important. Then what we do is we develop questions around these based on those library of questions I sent you and things that we can develop. Then there's a category weighting right here. So if you list it as a very important part, you might list it as a 2. So say attention to detail in this particular job is really, really important. In other words, if they score them a 2, you're going to double that score because the level of importance. It's going to automatically double that score in that matrix. So that way, and you don't always have to go exact score, but you and your search committee team can maybe go through this exercise, and then maybe you look at the top 3 or top 4 and say, okay, let's take a look at the soft skills they were good in, the soft skills they weren't good in. Let's take a look overall at how they interviewed. And this is a much more objective and measurable way to look at it versus asking a lot of general questions and going by what, of course, we call the gut feeling or the initial impression interview bias. So this is just an example of something I can help put together with you as you're on the search committees, and it kind of ties it all together then. So we start with the hard and soft skills, determine what that is, build interview questions based on behavioral interviewing using the STAR method. And then we develop this matrix for the people that you want to interview. And then we make sure that the questions that we ask, we make sure we assign what soft skill on this matrix it's going to be measuring. And then we give it a score based on the interviews. So I hope that ties it all together a little bit for you. Once again, I can send you all this information. And we're getting about 3 minutes left. So are there any other questions that anybody might have? I hope this was helpful. Was there another chat question? Okay. Yeah, the matrix kind of puts it all together, and but it's, once again, this is all based on behavioral interviewing, and it's just such a critical part of what we do, getting the right person in the right job. So I'm always available to help. Please, please, please call me or email me, and I'll send you guys all of these resources, and I will that way you'll have contact information on how to get to me. Anything you want to add, Jackie? I know you're on mute.
No, I'm off mute. No, I think you did a great job. Hopefully everybody found it valuable and useful. So it looks like everybody don't have a lot of questions, but seem to have really enjoyed the presentation, Tom.
Okay, well, thank you, everybody, and use me. That's what I'm here for. Thank you much. Have a great day and go blue.
Thank you. Have a great day.
Thank you.